Hi everyone, I have a short yoga practice for you today. We're going to be working with a movement that's known as hip extension. And hip extension is when your leg moves back in space behind your pelvis. Hip extension shows up in a number of different yoga poses where the leg is moving back in space. And the yoga poses can be a really useful way to work on this movement in your body, understanding it, refining it, strengthening it. So, we're going to play a little bit in that realm today. If you have a block, or if not a block, something you can stand on with one leg, even a stair would work, so that the other foot is free to move. And you'll notice I'm holding onto the wall. I highly recommend having something to hold on to when you're working on hip movement so that you're not trying to pay attention to what your leg is doing and also trying to balance at the same time. So that would be really helpful. And we're going to play in a couple of different positions here. We're going to get some awareness lying down first, and then we're going to stand up and we're going to see how this works in some different standing postures. So if you'd like to join me, we're going to lie down. This works best on a firmer surface. If you're able to get down to the floor, that's amazing. If you're not, you can play where you are. Just be aware that a softer surface is going to make it harder to really create stability and feel what's happening as we work on moving your legs. So if you can lie down on the front of your body, you're going to go ahead and do that. You can support your head either on your hands or fists, or you can bring a block underneath your head or something else, elbows wide. We're going to take a few breaths here and just to feel into this position, making any little adjustments you need to. Starting to feel your breath moving against the floor. Slowing down a little bit, tuning in to the sensations of your breath and the sensations in your body. So we're going to be working a lot as we go through this practice with feeling what's going on around your hips, building a kind of a map of your hip movement internally so that you're really getting awareness around what is going on when you're moving your leg backwards in space. And that map can take time to refine, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So you're working to the best of your ability with what you feel. And so taking this time here to kind of tune into your breath, tune into your body, let yourself settle into this position can be really, really important, right? So when you're ready, you're going to keep this sense of settledness in the upper body. So head is resting. Breath is moving against the floor. Maybe there's some quiet and ease that's developed in the upper body. And you're going to tuck your toes under so the pads of the toes are towards the floor. And then you're going to lift your knees. And even as we do this, there's a little movement of the legs. So as we straighten the knees, you may notice that your thighs have to lift a little bit off the floor. So we're actually creating a very small amount of hip extension as we do this. So see if you can notice as you're doing that movement, lifting the knees off the floor, does anything happen in around your pelvis or your low back? And can you do that lifting of the knees in such a way that the pelvis and low back stays really quiet? We often have this misconception that we can move our legs way back in space. But actually what we're usually using to do that is the pelvis, the low back. So we're learning to separate those two movements here by keeping the pelvis really quiet as you straighten and bend the knees. And then we'll just check in with one side at a time. So right side stays down as you straighten the left side.
paying attention to whether this reveals any movement through your pelvis and low back. And then we'll do the other side, left side staying down as the right side straightens. And sometimes this can help us see where maybe there is some instability, so we're rocking a bit side to side. Then you're going to see if you can slow down and do the movement in such a way that you don't need to do that rocking. But neither do you really need to brace the pelvis to keep it in space. Everything stays soft and easy. And some of us are just going to work here for a while, just figuring out how to do this movement in this way. If this is going really well for you and you feel like you can keep the pelvis pretty quiet as you do this, then you might keep the left side relaxed, straighten through the right, and then you're going to need to probably engage a little more to create a little more strength by tucking your tailbone towards the floor, feeling the pubis bone press into the floor, and then maybe seeing if you can actually lift the right leg up off the ground a bit. You won't have a lot of movement, so you'll notice if your pelvis stays still that you have just very little ability to lift that right leg. Relaxing through the right, creating stability through the pelvis by tucking the tailbone towards the floor, and then you lift the left leg up, only as far as it lifts. And then bring the left leg back down, softening everything, bringing the toenails down to the floor, taking a moment to just be here. So one of the things you may be noticing is that you don't actually have a whole lot of ability to lift your leg up without your pelvis moving. Some of us have more than others, but generally that range of motion is pretty small when we're talking about hip extension. So in postures where people are taking the leg way back, we're also usually seeing some movement happening through the pelvis in order to make that possible. So this is just good to know, especially if you have some discomfort, so that you can be aware of how you're moving as you're going through your yoga practice and going through your day, right? So from here, we're going to come up to standing. You're going to take your time to do so. And we're going to be doing some work on standing postures with a block. And the block, or however you want to do this, is just going to help give us some freedom of movement for the leg that's moving so that we're not having to also negotiate with the floor. So I'm going to start by bringing my right leg onto the block. I'm holding onto the wall for a little extra stability. I'm going to have my left foot right next to the right as though I were standing on the same surface. From here, I'm going to bring my hand to the hip so I can feel what my pelvis is doing in space. And I'm going to start to move this left leg in the hip. So I'm thinking about that leg bone moving in the hip socket. And I'm thinking about my pelvis staying steady. And I'm remembering the range of motion that I had when I was on the floor. So it wasn't a whole lot, especially on this side for me. And you might notice, like if you start to go further, what happens? Do you arch your back? Do you lean forward? Do you roll your hip and your toes out, right? So you're kind of getting to know your patterns here, and then you're going to see if you can find a nice, easy movement. Staying fairly relaxed, moving the left leg in the range of motion you have while the pelvis stays pretty quiet. And then you might try the other side. You might even stand for a moment. Notice what you feel. And then step your left foot onto the block, holding onto that support again if you like. Right foot's next to the left as though you were standing on the same surface, but we have freedom of movement now in the right leg. And we're just going to swing it. And at first you're just exploring, what does the right hip feel like? Might be quite different from the left. So you might have more or less range of motion. You might also have more or less ease. So maybe it feels kind of clunky, or you have less awareness, right? Less of a robust internal map of what it feels like when you move your hip, or where your hip is in space, where your leg is in space, right?
So you're just kind of noticing what you notice as you move this leg. Seeing if you can keep the pelvis quiet. Noticing what happens if you try to go further. What does this side want to do to allow that movement to take place? So that you're really getting to know this movement now in the right leg. You might notice which muscles are working, right, to create this movement as well. And then we'll come and stand. Just taking a moment. Stand fairly normally. Notice what you feel. Notice the level of awareness or mapping that you've built up around your legs and hips. How does it feel to have both feet on the floor? And then I'm going to bring my right foot onto this block again. I'm actually a little bit outside of my mat. You might choose to have your foot on the mat or not. I am going to step my left leg down to the mat eventually here. So as I'm standing on this, I'm going to find even pelvis, feet side by side. I'm going to find that range of motion that I have in this hip. I'm going to bring my leg back into extension as far as it goes. And then I'm going to recognize that I need to use my right leg and my pelvis as I step my left foot down to the ground. So now I'm in kind of a strange warrior one shape. I have my left foot on the floor. I have my right foot elevated on a block. And I can play with straightening and bending this right leg. Noticing that as I bend, my pelvis comes forward, and that brings my left leg back behind the hip, right? So you might notice as you're here, is there a place where this hip no longer moves, the back left hip no longer moves, and then something else has to happen? And you can kind of play with the distance between the feet as you're doing this. Now, if you don't have a block, or if you were playing on the stairs previously, then you want to just do this with your feet on the floor, you can. Okay. The block just changes things up a little bit. So some people may find it's a little easier to feel what's happening as you're coming in and out. You might find your pose and hold. You could even bring your arms up if you want to. And then we're going to step out, come to stand. Notice how you feel. And then as I come to do the other side here, left foot comes onto the block. Right foot is beside as though I'm standing on the same surface. I'm going to get reacquainted with the movement in my right hip because it isn't the same as my left. So pelvis is still. I'm feeling into what movement is available here. I'm going to find that hip extension as it exists. And then I'm going to use my front hip and knee to step this right foot back in space. And then I have this kind of strange warrior one stance. One foot is elevated. And I'm going to come in and out with attention to what's happening in this back hip. So thinking about my pelvis being upright. As I'm stepping in and out, I'm noticing what's happening here with this back leg. And then I might come in any amount and hold. If it feels good to take your arms up, you can bring your arms up. You don't have to. So as we're working in the hips, if it helps to have your hands on the hips to feel free to do that instead. It still counts, right? So, breathing and feeling. And then you're going to step out, take a moment to stand and feel. And you can play with this awareness in all kinds of places. So you can play with it with the feet on the same surface as you're bringing the leg back. Now taking that awareness into a regular warrior one on the floor, right? Or any other pose where the leg is back, maybe you're balancing, right? You can bring that awareness of what is that actual range of motion that I have in my hip extension, right? If I keep my pelvis still, what is the movement I have in my leg? And then how can that awareness guide what else needs to happen as I move into my posture, whatever that may be, right? So I hope this was helpful to kind of understand what's going on in the hips, to start to build that internal map, that felt sense of your own body and what it's doing in space as you're moving through your yoga practice. If you have questions, please ask them in the comments. I'd be glad to answer them. And feel free to explore this. I think you'll find it might take you other places. I hope you enjoy the journey. Thanks for practicing with me as always. May we all be balanced and well.